What is exactly the point of meditation, and why do you say in one of your essays, which is Personal Evolution, you say that meditation is the necessary methodology for the exploration of consciousness? Let me just pose the reason why I'm asking this question, which is that
yes.
It seems to me that from my own personal studies, my conversations with people like you, I can glean the sort of wisdom that it's taken maybe many centuries of meditation. I can glean that. I can understand that. It can be distilled to me either in book form or in conversation form. It seems to me that scientists can go out and experiment and conduct rigorous scientific experiments to unlock the secrets of nature, different things like that. Why is it that why is meditation the method? Or is it not the only method? Is there some other method that can be used to explore consciousness the way you see it? And is it possible that maybe some of these other methods are even better and more reliable, yield more reliable results than, say, meditation in terms of unlocking various questions or unlocking the answers to various questions about ourselves, about nature, about the universe?
Great and complex question. And the answer is yes and no. The answer is meditation is not the only vehicle, but something akin. But what I can say is that what can be realized, what needs to be realized, cannot be realized intellectually. And so when we talk about that, you can read about it, you can have other kinds of experiences which infer to you. It's very interesting because one of the things that we're right now, for anyone who is a practitioner of, again, rather than using the word meditation, let me come back to the root of Buddhism and say anyone who is a practitioner of awakening. And again, so awakening, what does awakening mean? Awakening into what? Awakening out of what? I used the word before that we're living inside of a virtual reality, a matrix of concepts that have been programmed into us. And this is true of everyone. It is even true of the Buddha. It is true of Thich Nhat Hanh. It is true of the Dalai Lama. We are all the products at a particular level of mind of the conditioning of the information that has been given to us by society, by culture, by parents, by education, by our own research.
By genetics?
By genetics as well. That we are the awakening that comes about, the awakening that this thing enlightenment is about, is the realization that, boy, this is a complex issue and difficult to talk about, that we are more than form. And when I say form, it is the form of the physical and the form of the intellectual, the form of the mind, the forms in the mind. In Buddhist psychology, thinking is referred to as mental form. That we create in the field of mind representations in form of the forms that we experience in the world. Now, of course, when we're talking about forms, again, we're back to this issue of separateness. Everything is its own separate form. And in a world that is nothing but separate form, firstly, I'm not sure that such a world could actually exist. Because without an integrating force, I don't know that separate form could exist just as separate form. However, that aside, to experience only separate form and all of the alternative sources of information that you're talking about are all about form. interesting, again, it's so important to realize that at the heart of Buddhism is the realization of a mystery. What is also very interesting, as you're talking about science, what's very interesting is that only in the last 100 years has Western science gained a view of the universe that you could have asked a yogi 3,000 years ago about, and they'd have been able to give you the answer. That Western science, operating only at the level of form, with instrumentation to measure form,
Right.
and mathematics to abstract and equate to form, could be able to come to the realization that we are living in a universe which is fundamentally a single energy pattern, and that it is all interconnected and it is all interrelated. That has been known by human beings for thousands of years. How? By awakening to the realization of a dimension that is beyond form. To awakening to the realization, to the direct experience. When I say realization, realization is an abstraction. A direct experience of the interconnectedness of all aspects of life. Now, meditation is a path to that realization. It is a path that is available to anyone who is open and available to it. Now, I said there are other paths, and there's all kinds of documentation and history of, in a sense, spontaneous awakenings. People who, without immediate meditation, simply one day, through whatever, went, wait a minute, this reality that I thought I was living is an extremely constricted experience of what is absolutely possible. And in that moment, their whole experience expanded dramatically, so that they were realizing that what the perspective that they have been living is a perspective amongst infinite perspectives. The problem with the egoic orientation, and the orientation that our society is based on, against all evidence, this is what's so interesting, the irrationality, against all evidence that says this doesn't work, we continue to assume my perspective is the right perspective. And my perspective is the only perspective that ought to be respected. And all other perspectives are wrong perspectives, and they need to be confronted, they need to be transformed, they need to be done away with if necessary, they need to be killed if necessary. And so here we are in human history, and here we are as human beings, struggling in this dualistic paradigm that says, I'm here and you're there, and it is of the utmost importance that I be right. I cannot continue to exist unless I am right, because René Descartes said in the 16th century, I think, therefore I am, and so my thinking better be right, or else my existence is entirely
I think
under
a lot of
question.
people feel that way without knowing anything about Descartes.
Oh, yes. It has nothing to do with it. Again, but the issue is, and so against all evidence of what a terrible muck it makes for us to be caught in this paradigm of that I am alone in the universe and you are alone in the universe, and I have a perspective on what's going on in the universe, and you have a perspective that's what's going on in the universe. And in order for my existence to be valid, my perspective has to be the right one, which means I have to make your perspective the wrong one. Now again, this is the egoic perspective. This is what comes from investing identity in that experience of separateness. When your identity is no longer invested in the experience of separateness, but rather your identity is invested in the experience of interconnectedness, and you are able to see, to experience how your egoic perspective is what is creating the conflict in your life and is what is creating the conflict in the world. There is a psychological model that is called the Gestalt model. And in the Gestalt model is basically the study of what's called figure-ground relationship, that everybody's experiencing the world, and they have a general, the world is the background. And out of the totality of the everything that is the background, which is the ground of existence, we each pull a very individualized, very personalized figure of what the possibilities are, and we call it our reality. And for each person, it's different. And it's, again, shaped by all of those factors of culture, society, even genetics. A person who's predisposition to a particular pattern of the brain working is going to experience things differently from another person. But even more directly on a purely experiential level, it's like I like to share with people, it's like this insight, which is, and this helps explain the difference between the Western psychological model and the Buddhist psychological model. To ask the question, what makes an anxious person an anxious person? What makes an angry person an angry person? What makes a depressed person a depressed person? Okay, so in the Western psychological model, we are now going to deconstruct the conditioning of the person that includes the biochemical as well as what the experiential and the family and all of that is, and try to figure out where there are errors in their cognitive, emotive relationship to the world that causes them to be anxious or angry or depressed. And Western psychology is pretty good at that. It's after doing that you kind of get into, and now what? And so they come up with all these various different theories and modalities and practices of psychotherapy. An interesting thing about that is another one of the really insightful Western psychologists was a man named Carl Rogers. And Carl Rogers is kind of known as the father of humanistic psychology. But he did a study, and he did a study as to the effectiveness of various psychological psychotherapeutic techniques, behaviorism, analysis, so on, of his day. And what he found was that there was absolutely no difference in effectiveness of the techniques. All these techniques that were arguing with each other, all these schools of psychological thought, arguing with each other, we've got it right, you've got it wrong, about which is more effective. He found there was absolutely no difference in the effectiveness. What did make a difference in the effectiveness of the psychotherapy was not the technique, but that which is very difficult to measure, except by report, the authentic and genuine presence that the therapist brought into the encounter with the client. Again, what was therapeutic was the experience of there is a connection, not an exploration of all of the factors that went into the issues of separateness, but what was therapeutic was one human being encountering another human being in a genuine connection.